In a move that sent shockwaves through financial markets and diplomatic circles alike, President Donald Trump has just announced a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian imports. The announcement, made during a high-profile press conference, caught both Wall Street and world leaders off guard, with immediate reactions rippling across global stock exchanges and newsrooms. Trump justified the drastic measure by pointing to the ongoing fentanyl crisis, claiming that Canadian imports were somehow linked to the surge in illicit drugs entering the United States. However, this justification was met with widespread skepticism. Many experts, from economists to public health officials, quickly challenged the connection, arguing that the fentanyl crisis is a complex issue, not directly tied to Canadian trade. Television panels lit up with heated debates, and analysts expressed concern that the move was more about political posturing than genuine policy. The implications for Canada's export-driven economy are profound. Factories across the country, from automotive plants in Ontario to lumber mills in British Columbia, now face an uncertain future. Shipping ports, once bustling with goods destined for American markets, have slowed as companies scramble to assess the impact. For thousands of Canadian workers, the threat of layoffs and plant closures looms large, and the sense of anxiety is palpable in industrial towns nationwide. Responding within hours, Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed the nation and the world with a tone of unwavering resolve. Standing before a sea of reporters and the Canadian flag, Carney declared that Canada would not be bullied or coerced by economic threats, no matter how powerful the source. He emphasized that while Canada remains open to working with the United States on shared challenges such as border security and public health, the country will defend its industries, its workers, and its economic sovereignty at all costs. Carney's message was clear: cooperation is possible, but capitulation is not. Carney went further, calling Trump's tariff a blatant act of economic intimidation. He warned that Canada's sovereignty and prosperity are not bargaining chips, and that the nation would respond with strength and unity. Headlines across Canada and around the world echoed his defiant words as citizens rallied behind their leader. With an August 1st deadline looming for the tariffs to take effect, both governments are now bracing for what could be some of the most tense and consequential trade negotiations in decades. Business leaders on both sides of the border are urgently seeking clarity, while ordinary citizens worry about rising prices, job security, and the future of cross-border cooperation. This confrontation is about far more than tariffs or trade balances. It is a test of a partnership that has endured for over a century, underpinning the very fabric of North American economic integration. The fate of agreements like NAFTA and the USMCA now hangs in the balance, with the potential to reshape the continent's economic landscape for years to come. Carney's firm stance has struck a chord with Canadians from coast to coast. Public rallies have sprung up in support of the government's position, and a rare sense of national unity has emerged. Across the political spectrum, there is consensus. Canada must stand its ground and defend its interests. As the world watches this high-stakes standoff unfold, the question remains: can diplomacy and reason prevail, or are we on the brink of a full-blown economic war? The coming weeks will determine not just the future of US-Canada relations, but the stability of the global trading system itself. Prime Minister Carney has begun to temper expectations, signaling a significant shift in the government's approach to trade with the United States. In recent speeches and public appearances, Carney has moved away from promising a return to the days of completely open borders and frictionless trade. Instead, he's urging Canadians to brace for a more complicated reality, one where the old certainties no longer apply. Carney has openly admitted that a completely tariff-free deal with the Trump administration is likely out of reach, despite months of intense negotiations and diplomatic efforts. The political climate in Washington has shifted, and protectionist policies are now front and center. This means that even the closest allies like Canada are not immune to new trade barriers. As a result, Carney is preparing Canadians for a new era, one where some US tariffs on key exports like steel, aluminum, and autos may become permanent fixtures. These industries, which have long relied on easy access to the American market, now face an uncertain future. Workers and business owners are being told to adapt to a world where cross-border trade is no longer guaranteed to be smooth or predictable. Recent Canadian concessions, such as dropping a proposed digital sales tax, were intended to ease tensions and demonstrate goodwill. However, these gestures have so far failed to thaw relations or prevent the imposition of new tariffs. The US administration remains firm, and the hoped-for breakthroughs have not materialized. In response, the government's focus is shifting from preventing tariffs altogether to minimizing their impact on the Canadian economy. This means developing new support programs for affected industries, seeking alternative export markets, and investing in innovation to help businesses stay competitive in a tougher environment. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has seized on this moment, accusing Carney of surrendering Canadian interests without securing real gains in return. He argues that the government's strategy amounts to accepting defeat, and he's calling for a more aggressive approach to defending Canadian jobs and industries. Meanwhile, trade experts warn that the upcoming renegotiation of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement could bring even more volatility. With so much at stake, they caution that both businesses and policymakers must prepare for a period of uncertainty, where the rules of trade could change rapidly and unpredictably. The old assumption of a special open relationship with the US is being fundamentally challenged. Decades of close economic ties are now being tested by shifting political winds and rising nationalism on both sides of the border. Canadians are being told, the era of easy access to the American market is over. The message from Ottawa is clear: prepare for a tougher, more competitive future, where resilience and adaptability will be key to surviving and thriving in a rapidly changing global economy. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Carney convenes an emergency cabinet meeting to craft a unified response to Trump's tariff threat. The government is weighing all options, from diplomatic appeals to potential retaliation, before making any public moves. The White House has hinted that some goods compliant with the current trade agreement might be exempt, but Ottawa remains silent, signaling a strategic pause. Carney plans to meet with provincial premiers to forge a united national front. Behind closed doors, ministers debate which countermeasures would have the most impact and how to avoid a devastating trade war. The government urges Canadians to stay calm and united as the crisis unfolds. The decisions made in these tense days will define Canada's response and set the tone for North American relations for years to come. The stakes could not be higher. Trump's proposed tariff poses a dire and immediate threat to Canada's economy, which is deeply intertwined with the United States through decades of trade agreements and cross-border commerce. Every day, billions of dollars in goods and services flow between the two countries, supporting millions of jobs and entire communities on both sides of the border. The automotive, steel, and aluminum sectors, cornerstones of Canadian manufacturing, are especially vulnerable. These industries are not just major employers, they are also deeply integrated with U.S. supply chains. A sudden tariff could disrupt production lines, halt shipments, and force companies to reconsider their operations in Canada, potentially leading to catastrophic job losses and plant closures. In response, business leaders are urgently lobbying Ottawa, pressing the government to negotiate the lowest possible tariffs, or ideally, to secure exemptions. They warn that even a short-term disruption could have long-lasting effects, eroding Canada's competitive edge and investor confidence. As a result, there is a growing chorus calling for a long-term strategy to diversify Canada's trade relationships. Many experts argue that reducing dependence on the U.S. is essential for economic resilience, urging the government to expand partnerships with Europe, Asia, and other global markets. The agricultural sector, which is the backbone of many rural communities, is also sounding the alarm. Losing tariff-free access to the vast U.S. market could devastate Canadian farms and food producers, threatening livelihoods and the stability of rural economies. For Canada, maintaining open and reliable access for agricultural exports is a non-negotiable priority. Any barriers could lead to surplus crops, falling prices, and mounting financial stress for farmers. If a trade war drags on, the consequences could be severe. Factory closures, widespread job losses, and a noticeable decline in the standard of living for many Canadians. The ripple effects would be felt across the entire economy. Even the uncertainty surrounding the tariffs is damaging. Businesses are delaying investments, putting off hiring, and scaling back expansion plans, all of which slow economic growth and increase anxiety among workers and entrepreneurs. The government now faces immense pressure to act decisively and shield Canadians from the worst of the fallout. Policymakers are scrambling to develop contingency plans, reassure the public, and protect the most vulnerable industries as the situation continues to evolve. Trade talks between Canada and the U.S. have stalled, leaving businesses in limbo. Carney accuses Trump of using tariffs as a weapon, poisoning the atmosphere for any real negotiation. An earlier agreement to collaborate on a new trade pact has been unilaterally delayed by Trump, deepening the crisis. With the August 1st deadline looming, pressure mounts on both sides to find a resolution. Carney faces criticism at home, with opposition leader Poilievre accusing him of conceding too much without guarantees. The risk of a full-blown trade war grows with each passing day. The complex web of North American commerce hangs in the balance. The world watches, wondering if reason will prevail, or if the neighbors are headed for economic conflict. Throughout the crisis, Carney has maintained a firm stance, vowing Canada will not be intimidated or accept a deal that undermines its interests. Canada has warned it will retaliate with its own tariffs if the U.S. moves forward, though details remain confidential. This strategy signals Canada is not a passive victim, but ready to defend its economy and national pride. Ottawa's message: any resolution must be based on mutual respect, not one-sided demands. The government balances standing firm with keeping the door open for negotiation. It's a risky approach, but one Carney's team believes is necessary to protect Canada's long-term interests. The stakes are high, but so is Canada's resolve. Trade experts warn that even a short-term deal won't resolve the underlying tensions. Instability may become the new normal. Business leaders urge the government to secure the lowest possible tariffs and push for aggressive trade diversification. The agricultural sector is especially alarmed, stressing that new tariffs could devastate farms and rural communities. These voices highlight the real-world consequences of the dispute, adding pressure on Ottawa to protect vital sectors. The concerns are not abstract. They're about jobs, investments, and the future of communities across Canada. The crisis is forcing a national reckoning with Canada's economic vulnerability. The path forward will require both immediate negotiation and a long-term rethinking of Canada's global role. As the crisis unfolds, Canada is pivoting to a long-term strategy of adaptation and diversification. Carney's government is investing in domestic innovation and productivity to make Canadian industries more resilient and globally competitive. The plan reduces reliance on the U.S. by fast-tracking new trade agreements with Asia, South America, and Europe. The goal is a portfolio of trade relationships that cushions Canada from future U.S. volatility. This generational project will require investment, political will, and a national consensus to look beyond the immediate crisis. The current dispute is a wake-up call, exposing Canada's vulnerability. While de-escalating the conflict remains urgent, the legacy may be a new resolve to forge an independent economic destiny. Canada is taking steps to secure a more stable and prosperous future in an unpredictable world. The US-Canada relationship is under unprecedented strain, with the August 1st deadline looming and trust at an all-time low. The crisis is forcing Canada to redefine its relationship with the US in more transactional, cautious terms. The old assumption of a reliable partnership has been shattered, and rebuilding trust will be difficult. Canada must now invest in its own security, build new alliances, and act as a more independent global player. This transition is challenging but increasingly necessary to preserve Canadian sovereignty and prosperity. In the short term, tough negotiations with the US continue. In the long term, Canada is looking beyond its southern neighbor for security and growth. The special relationship may endure, but its character has changed. Canada is forging a new path forward.